So, my brother-in-law, who's married to my sister, told my wife he was in love with her. Then, out of the blue, he asked her if she could meet him for lunch. He said there was something he needed to talk to her about. When my wife told me about this, she seemed puzzled but not overly concerned. "Do you think it's about my sister?" she asked, furrowing her brow. "Maybe they're having problems and he wants to get a woman's perspective on things." I found the whole situation odd. My wife's in-law had never reached out to her like this before, but he often texted her and other family members for everyday stuff, so I didn't think much of it. After all, we were a close-knit family and it wasn't unusual for us to support each other through tough times. But I told her, shrugging off my initial unease, that my wife agreed to meet him at a cafe near her office the next day. The next morning, as she was getting ready for work, she mentioned lunch again. "I'm still not sure what this is about," she said, a hint of worry in her voice. I reassured her, saying we're a close-knit family and it wasn't unusual for us to support each other through tough times. I told her, shrugging off my initial unease. My wife agreed, deciding to meet him at a cafe near her office the next day. The next morning, as she was getting ready for work, she mentioned lunch again. "I'm still not sure what this is about," she said, a hint of worry in her voice. I reassured her, saying it was probably nothing serious, just listen to what he has to say, and if it's something we need to help with, we'll figure it out together. I said, "It's a busy cafe, filled with the usual lunchtime crowd, and my wife feels a bit more at ease being in such a public setting. She arrives a bit early, finding a table near the window where she can keep an eye on the entrance. He arrives a few minutes later. He looked more nervous than she'd ever seen him. They said the usual stuff about work and the kids for a bit, but as soon as their food arrived, he took a deep breath and started to say what he really wanted to say. He complimented her and told her how beautiful she looked. At first, she thought he was just being polite, but then he kept going. He told her how he says she's always been the light in his life and how she makes him feel things he's never felt before. He says he's loved her since he first saw her, and if she were his, he'd treat her like a queen and give her everything she deserves. His wife is stunned and can't believe it. She's staring at him, unable to believe it. "This man is my brother. He says he's loved her since he first saw her, and that if they were together, he'd treat her like a queen and give her everything she deserves." My wife is stunned. She stares at him, unable to believe what she's hearing. This man, who's married to my sister and is the father of their 2 kids, is pouring his heart out to her. He's making grand promises about how different life would be if they were together. He goes on to say that he's been holding these feelings in for years, watching her and admiring her from afar, and feeling more and more. He says they're meant to be together and she's trying to interrupt to tell him he's making a huge mistake, but he keeps talking over her, almost as if he's rehearsed this speech 1,000 times in his head. Mind you, this man has always had a friendly relationship with my wife and our family see each other often, since we're a close-knit group. We're a close-knit bunch and he's always been the fun uncle to our kids, the guy who's there at every family barbecue, every holiday dinner. He texts my wife a lot, but it's always about the kids, schedules, family events, things like that. Nothing overly sexual, nothing that would set off any alarms. In fact, he texts and calls my mom too. They have a friendly rapport. We've always seen him as a good guy, someone we trust. So when my wife told me, it was a bit of a shock. She didn't let him finish. She stood up, made a noise as she walked out. She was shaking when she called me, telling me everything that had happened while she was on the. We never thought anything of it, but then my wife told me about it and it was a bit of a shock. She's always been a good person, someone we trust, so to hear her say this was hard. She didn't let him finish. She stood up, chair scraping on the floor, and walked out. She was shaking when she called me and told me what had happened while she was on the phone. The texts from him started with him saying sorry. He didn't mean it, he thought it was just infatuation, he was sorry for making her uncomfortable, but the damage was done. She left work early to come home and talk to me about it. Her phone was buzzing with his calls and messages. I told her to answer one of his calls and put him on speaker so I could hear. I got a text from him and it was full of apologies. He said he didn't mean it, that it was just infatuation, and he was sorry for making her uncomfortable, but he'd already done too much. She left work early to come home and talk to me about it. Her phone was constantly buzzing with his calls and messages. I told her to answer one of his calls and put him on speaker so I could hear him crying and begging her not to tell my sister. He kept saying it was a mistake and that he'd misunderstood. He thought my wife was flirting with him and that they had a moment alone in our kitchen where they felt a connection. My wife is a major ball buster, and I suppose I can see how that can be. He says it was a mistake and that he thought she felt the same way. He says he thought my wife was flirting with him and that they had a moment alone in our kitchen where they felt a connection. I suppose I can see how that could be, given that my wife is a major ball buster. But this is beyond anything we could have imagined. He asks if she told me and I answer yes. As I'm on speaker, then he starts begging me, pleading for us to keep this a secret. This went on for a while, with him begging and us listening. My main question was whether he had cheated on my sister before. He swore he hadn't, swearing on his kids' lives that it hadn't happened. I thought it was just my wife, but now I'm not so sure. He asked if she'd told me, and I said yes, as I'd put my phone on speaker. Then he started begging me to keep it a secret. This went on for a while, him begging and us listening. I asked whether he'd cheated on my sister before, and he swore he hadn't. He said it was just my wife, and that I should understand that. I told him I wasn't going to do anything tonight and that I'd call him tomorrow. Now we're left with this mess, not knowing what to do next. My wife says we should drive over there right now and tell my sister, but the idea of wrecking my sister's family is killing me. I can't even think about what this will do to my nieces without feeling physically sick. I know I should tell my sister, but I'm also thinking about my wife. It's not her fault, but there'll definitely be resentment from my family, even if my sister doesn't divorce him and they reconcile. I can't see how we'll ever be together again like we were before, if at all. This whole situation is just. This whole episode is going to destroy my family. I don't care about him. He tried to destroy my family. But I do care about everyone else. Update: so, everyone who told me last night that I couldn't wait to tell my sister was right. A little after 12, I got a call from my sister. She sounded upset and said she had to tell me something. My heart sank as she explained that her husband, my brother, I'm worried that this episode is going to cause some major drama in my family. I don't care about him, he tried to destroy my family, but I do care about everyone else. Update: so, everyone who told me last night that I couldn't wait to tell my sister was right. A little after 12, I got a call from my sister. She sounded upset and said she had to tell me something. My heart sank as she explained that her husband, my brother-in-law, had come to her in tears claiming that my wife had tried to start an affair with him. He spun a tale where my wife was the instigator and tried to blame her entirely. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I immediately told my sister that wasn't the case and assured her that I would be right over there to sort things out face to face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when my in-law told me my wife had tried to start an affair with him. I told my sister straight away that this wasn't true and that I would sort things out with her. I hung up and called my parents. I woke my mom and dad and explained what was happening. My dad was furious and my mom sounded shocked but determined. They agreed to go to my sister's house to support her and the kids. I called my parents and my younger brother as soon as I got off the phone. I could tell my mom was shocked and my dad was furious. They said they'd come over to my sister's house to stay with the kids while she was dealing with the situation. My younger brother said he'd come over too, and he'd make sure the kids weren't left alone. Meanwhile, my wife was already getting her things together. She looked pale. I called my younger brother next. He answered, looking confused, but then more alarmed as I explained the situation. He promised to come over to our place and stay with the kids, to make sure they wouldn't be left alone while everything was going on. His calm and steady presence would be a comfort to them. Meanwhile, my wife was already gathering her things. She looked pale and drawn. She was dreading the confrontation, but knew it was necessary. We left the house in a hurry. The the drive to my sister's place feeling longer than it actually was. The silence in the car was heavy, both of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, the scene was even more tense than I had imagined. My sister was out on the front porch with my brother. She was dreading the confrontation, but knew it was necessary. We left the house in a hurry, the drive to my sister's place feeling longer than it actually was. The silence in the car was heavy, both of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, the scene was even more tense than I had imagined. My sister is out on the front porch with my brother-in-law when we get there. He looks beaten, eyes downcast, his posture slumped in defeat. He knows we have the texts and voicemails, the undeniable proof of his betrayal. I really don't know what he was hoping to accomplish by calling my sister in the middle of the night with his lies. Maybe he thought he could get ahead of the story and change the narrative to save himself, but it was a feeble effort. As we walk up to them, the tension in when we get there, my in-law looks beaten. He's got his eyes down, his posture slumped, like he's defeated. He knows we've got the texts and voicemails, the proof of his betrayal. I don't know what he was hoping to do by calling my sister in the middle of the night with his lies. Maybe he thought he could change the story to save himself, but it was a feeble effort. You could feel the tension in the air as we walked up to them. My wife was trembling, looking angry and hurt. She gave my sister her phone without saying anything. My sister took it, her hands were steady, but her eyes were burning with a mix of fury and pain. She scrolled through the texts, her expression hardening with each one she read. Then she listened to the voicemails. The damning evidence of his declarations and her refusals before she could say anything. My brother-in-law starts sobbing. This is a man who runs into burning buildings, who faces danger daily without flinching. Seeing him like this, broken and vulnerable, is jarring. His cries are deep and guttural, raw with regret and fear. It's a scene that's almost surreal, a big, tough firefighter brought to his knees. My sister's face is impassive. She's always been tough, but right now she's unyielding. She waits for him to finish. Her silence is more powerful than any words. When he finally stops hiccuping with the remnants of his sobs, she speaks. "Pack," she says, "a bag and go. I can't stand to look at you." He tries to argue, to plead his case, but she's having none of it. "Stop it," she snaps, cutting through his words. "There's nothing you can say that will make this better." She turns away from him, walks over to my wife and pulls. She says, "A bag and a go. I can't stand to look at you." He tries to argue or plead, but she's having none of it. "Stop it," she snaps, cutting through his words. "There's nothing you can say that will make this better." She turns away from him and walks over to my wife, pulling her into a hug. It's a moment of solidarity between them, a small comfort in the middle of this nightmare. They've been friends since college, and the strength of their bond is evident. It's a relief to see that, despite everything, they're standing together. This leaves me standing with my brother. He gives her a hug. It's a moment of solidarity between them, a small comfort in the middle of this nightmare. They've been friends since college and the strength of their bond is evident. It's a relief to see that, despite everything, they're standing together. This leaves me standing with my brother-in-law. He's a wreck, his face is red and swollen from crying, his shoulders are slumped, and he looks at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding or forgiveness. But I have none to offer. He tries to speak, his voice cracking, but I cut him off. "You need to leave," I say firmly, "this is your mess. You need to deal with the consequences. My in-law's a mess. He's got a red, swollen face and is looking at me, eyes pleading for some kind of understanding or forgiveness. But I can't offer any." He tries to speak, but his voice is cracking. I cut him off. "You need to leave," I say. "This is your mess. You need to deal with the consequences." He nods, defeated, and slowly makes his way inside to pack his things. My sister stays with my wife. The two of them talk quietly, leaning on each other for support. The rest of the night is a blur of conversations and plans. We all rally around my sister, helping her figure out what to do next and how to protect her kids from the fallout. My sister begins questioning my wife, trying to understand why her husband thought any of this could possibly work out. He must have had some reason to believe she reciprocated his feelings. My sister insists that there hadn't been any issues in their marriage. Everything had been normal. My wife is crying at this point, tears streaming down her face as she tries to make sense of the situation. She says, her voice shaking, that there's nothing you haven't seen. She hands my sister her phone again and together they go through every text message sent over the past 2 years, reading each one carefully for any hint of inappropriate behavior. But there's nothing there. My wife was just being herself. She has a playful personality, always joking around and teasing. It's part of what makes her so lovable and approachable. My brother, my in-law, has a similar sense of humor and they've always teased each other in a light-hearted way. They tease each other in a light-hearted, harmless way. She does the same with my mom and my younger brother. It's just how she interacts with people. The only incident my wife can think of that might have been misconstrued happened this past weekend. She recounts it, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. They were all together at our place, and she and my brother-in-law has a good sense of humor and they've always teased each other in a light-hearted, harmless way. She does the same with my mom and my younger brother. It's just how she interacts with people. The only incident my wife can think of that might have been misconstrued happened this past weekend. She recounts it, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong. They were all together at our place and she and my brother-in-law both reached for the fridge at the same time. They playfully jostled for who would get there first, laughing as they did so. He let her win, but then he reached around her waist to grab a beer. Moving his hand slowly, she admits that in that moment, the way he did it felt a little inappropriate. It was a fleeting feeling and she brushed it off, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. She wonders now if her silence gave him some misguided hope. Sister listens, her expression softening. She doesn't blame my wife for any of this. She knows her well enough to understand that her playful nature isn't an invitation for anything more. It's not your fault, she reassures her, and my wife nods, though the guilt still lingers. As they finish reading through the messages, it's clear there was never any mutual attraction, no hidden signals or secret flirtations. My wife was just being herself, and my brother. Sister listens, her expression softens. She doesn't blame my wife for any of this. She knows her well enough to understand that her playful nature isn't an invitation for anything more. It's not your fault, she reassures her, and my wife nods, though the guilt still lingers. As they finish reading through the messages, it's clear there was never any mutual attraction, no hidden signals or secret flirting. My wife was just being herself, and my brother. Sister looks a bit more relaxed. She doesn't blame my wife for anything that's happened. She knows her well enough to know that her playful nature isn't an invitation for anything more. It's not your fault, she says, as my wife nods, but the guilt still lingers. As they finish reading through the messages, it's clear there was never any attraction, no hidden signals or secret flirting. My wife was just being herself, and my brother-in-law took that and twisted it into something it wasn't. The realization that this misunderstanding has caused so much pain is almost too much to bear, but at least for now, my sister still believes my wife. She starts going through his MacBook to see what else she doesn't know about. She's angry and frantic at this point. Her hands are shaking as she types. She guesses the password and, on the third try, she's in. With a deep breath, she starts searching through his files for anything that might shed more light on this nightmare. It doesn't take long. Before she finds something weird, there's a load of pictures of my wife in a folder labeled innocuously. They date back years, and what's more unsettling is that they're always isolated shots, just her, never in group settings or candid family moments. My sister clicks through them, her anger turning into a cold, creeping horror. One set of photos stands out. A few years ago, we went on a couple's trip to the Caribbean. It was a rare vacation without the kids, and my wife, feeling more relaxed in the adults-only environment, had worn a bikini she usually doesn't prefer. She'd gone for something more modest, but this time she felt comfortable enough to do so. There were probably about 50 pictures of her in that bikini, each one taken without her knowledge. My sister's face palms as she scrolls through them. It's clear he's been secretly snapping these photos for years, collecting more modest swimwear, but this time she felt comfortable enough to wear it. There were probably 50 pictures of her in that bikini, each one taken without her knowledge. My sister's face palms as she scrolls through them. It's clear he's been snapping these photos for years, collecting them obsessively. The realization that he's been harboring this fixation in the shadows of family events sends a shiver down her spine. Does this now enter restraining order territory? She wonders aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. This has taken a creepy turn, far beyond what. She says she's worried that he's been obsessed with this for a long time, and that now it's gone too far. She asks us to come over and shows us the pictures. My wife is shocked and can't believe it. She didn't know about this obsession. My sister is angry, but also hurt. She starts talking about what to do next, like getting a restraining order. We all have to think about what to do now. We're all shocked by this. We thought we knew this man. We trusted him as a husband, a father, and a brother. In-law has shown a side of himself that's dark and disturbing. It's not just a matter of infatuation anymore, it's something far more insidious. Unfortunately, the mess continues. My sister agreed to talk to her husband last night and let him explain himself. She was determined to get the full story and decided to involve my in-law has shown a side to himself that's dark and disturbing. It's not just a matter of infatuation anymore, it's something far more insidious. Unfortunately, the mess continues. My sister agreed to talk to her husband last night and let him explain himself. She was determined to get the full story and decided to involve my wife directly, to ensure there would be no lying or half-truths. They set up a FaceTime call with my wife, and I listened in off-camera. My heart was pounding with a mix of anger and dread. My sister ever thoroughly recorded the entire conversation for good measure. As soon as the call began, the tension was palpable. My brother-in-law looked knackered, his eyes all red and puffy from crying. He started hesitantly, his voice wobbly, but as he spoke the truth started to come out and the story unfolded in a way none of us had really thought through. He admitted he's been obsessed with my wife for years, ever since he met her. He looked knackered. His eyes were all red and puffy from crying. He started, really hesitantly, his voice was really shaky, but as he spoke the truth started to come out and the story unfolded in a way none of us had really anticipated. He admitted he's been obsessed with my wife for years. It started the day he met her. He confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, that it was during one of those early meetups where my sister, eager to introduce her new boyfriend to her friends, had brought him along. My wife and I were dating at the time, but he had met her before he met me. At first, he thought as he said he felt like he was in love, but he thought he could just ignore it. But as time went on, he realized he was more than just attracted to her. He liked her personality, how she laughed, and how she spoke to people. He said he found himself watching her, even when she was just being herself, playing and being nice. He said he tried to ignore these feelings, but he got more and more obsessed. He found ways to be near her more often, and he even offered to help with stuff. There were family events and lots of little excuses to text her about nothing. It was a slow, sneaky process that eventually led to the point where he felt he had to confess his feelings, deluding himself into believing she might feel the same way. My sister listened, her face a mask of controlled rage and heartbreak. My sister didn't interrupt him, letting him dig his own grave with each word. She was visibly shaken, and she could tell that this had been going on for a long time. When he finished, there was a heavy silence. My sister finally spoke. She was icy and measured as she asked, "Why did you think my wife would leave me for you?" Her eyes boring into him, he stammered, struggling to find the right words. He mentioned the supposed mutual attraction, the moments he had misinterpreted as signs of her reciprocation. My wife and sister exploded at that. They were so angry and frustrated they couldn't speak. There was a lot of swearing, a lot of screaming. They were so hurt and angry. My wife ended the call. Her hands were shaking and her face was white. She was worried about me, about us. She kept telling me the attraction was just. They were shouting and screaming, and it was clear they were really angry. My wife ended the call, her hands were shaking and she looked pale. She was worried about me and us, and kept telling me that she was attracted to him, but he only liked his body. I believed her, I always had. I knew she would never do anything about it, because she believes in trust and fidelity. She made that clear from the start. This whole thing was just a twisted fantasy of my brother-in-law. I believed her, I always had. I knew she would never act on it. She's serious about trust and fidelity, something she made clear early on in our relationship. This whole ordeal was a twisted fantasy of my brother-in-law, a dangerous delusion that had nearly torn our family apart. The tension that had been building up during the call finally erupted into a storm of swearing and screaming. My wife's voice was a mix of fury and hurt, while my sister was steely and unforgiving. The barrage of emotions was overwhelming, the air thick with betrayal and disbelief. The phone call abruptly ended when my wife, shaking and distraught, hung up because she was concerned for me. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. It was one of the most shocking experiences of my life. She told me her voice was trembling, but I knew she was just trying to soothe me. I told her I knew she wouldn't do anything, because I'm just not sure she's that type of person. There was a time early on in our relationship when she was showing me what she thought about trust and fidelity. I remember watching her one morning as she was getting dressed, admiring her without. She gave me a teasing smile and asked if I liked what I saw, but then her expression turned serious, almost cold. She said, her tone, leaving no room for misunderstanding, "You'll never see this again." She meant every word. My wife is serious about trust. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to mend. As I sat there replaying the chaotic scene in my mind, I couldn't help but reflect on my brother. In saying a word she noticed gave me a teasing smile and asked if I liked what I saw, but then her expression turned serious, almost cold. "Never," she said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "You'll never see this again." She meant every word. My wife is serious about trust. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to mend. As I sat there replaying the chaotic scene in my mind, I couldn't help but reflect on my brother-in-law. I knew he was a little cocky, always walking with a certain swagger, but my God, I never knew he thought so highly of himself to believe he could pull off something like this. His delusions of grandeur were staggering, completely detached from reality. I talked to my sister later on, once the initial shock had started to wear off and we could speak more calmly. She was resolute, determined to protect her children from the fallout of her husband's actions. She told me, "I knew my in-law was a bit of a show-off, always walking with a swagger, but I never knew he thought he was that great. His delusions of grandeur were unbelievable." Once the shock had worn off, I spoke to my sister and she told me she'd contact a lawyer on Monday morning to see what she could do to shield the kids from her husband's actions. She wanted to make sure they were protected from as much of this as possible. She said he was detached from reality. Her voice was steely with resolve. She said her concern was no longer about saving her marriage, but about protecting her children and maintaining a semblance of stability for them. Anyway, my sister's brother-in-law came back yesterday, not because she wants him back, but because she can't legally stop him. Even though there's all this drama and he's clearly been unfaithful, he's got the right to stay in the house until the legal stuff is sorted out. The atmosphere is tense and uncomfortable, with everyone giving each other the silent treatment, and you can tell there's a lot of resentment. They're done, and I think he knows that now. There's a hollow look in his eyes, like he gets that he can't save their marriage anymore. The lawyer says that, since my brother-in-law, my sister's brother, law's been acting weird recently, and it's all been documented. There's a good chance she'll get full custody of the kids. All the texts, voicemails, and those photos show how obsessed and unstable he is. He doesn't seem to want to fight her on it. It's like he knows he's lost everything and he's too tired to fight. My sister'll be fine, though. She's stronger than that. She looks stronger than ever, and there's no love lost between them. She's got her head down, focusing on the kids and their future. She doesn't seem upset, more like she's seen the truth and ready to move on. The kids don't know what happened, but they're definitely sensing something's wrong. Kids always do, they just don't know the details. My brother, she looks like she's lost all love for him. She's got a determined look about her and is totally focused on her kids and their future. She doesn't seem upset about it, she just seems like someone who's finally seen the truth and is ready to move on. The kids don't know what happened yet, but they're definitely sensing something's wrong. Kids always are, but they don't know the details. My brother-in-law was never around much anyway. When the kids were home, he often slept at the fire station pulling double shifts and overtime. He was always away, a silent but ever-present gap that they had grown used to. It'll definitely be hard on them once they know what's going to happen and the stability of their home. The stability of their home, even if it was a bit rocky, will change. My sister is prepared for this. She's already spoken to a child psychologist to help them deal with the questions and emotions that will come up. She's ready to be both mother and father to provide them with the love and support they'll need. As for my brother-in-law, he's staying in the guest room, just sort of hanging around in a house that doesn't feel like home anymore. He's kind of accepted what's going on, just doing the bare minimum, but he's not really fighting back. It's a sad situation, but I don't really feel sorry for him. Some of my friends have said that there must be other women out there who are as obsessed as my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law just stays in the guest room, not saying much and not really part of the family. It's sad, but I don't feel sorry for him. Some of my friends think there must be more women that he's obsessed with, but as far as we know, there hasn't been. It's just my wife that he's obsessed with. He's obsessed with her and there's no one else. After everything came out, my wife blocked his phone number to try and create some distance and protect herself. Law couldn't have been obsessed with just one person, but as far as we know, there hasn't been anyone else. He's obsessed with my wife. His obsession with her has been one-sided and intense, leaving no room for anyone else. After everything came to light, my wife blocked his phone number, trying to create some distance and protect herself from his unwanted advances, but on the same night, he returned home and sent my wife an email from a new account he'd set up. It started with a seemingly sincere apology, but it quickly took a turn into something much darker. He began by saying he never got to finish at the restaurant that day, implying there was more he needed. He then launched into paragraphs about all the things he loves about my wife, talking about the desperation he felt and the emotions that had driven him to act so irrationally. He even recounted every little detail he admired about her, her smile, her laugh, the way she interacted with others. It was really unsettling. To say the least, it was unsettling to see his obsession laid out so starkly. He mentioned their supposed mutual attraction again, insisting that there was a palpable sexual tension between them that he had always felt, delusional as he was, mistaking her friendly, playful nature for something more. He painted a picture of a connection that existed only in his imagination. To say the least, it was pretty shocking to see how obsessed he was. He mentioned their supposed mutual attraction again, insisting that there was a palpable sexual tension between them that he had always felt, but he was delusional in thinking that her friendly, playful nature was something more. He painted a picture of a connection that existed only in his mind, a fantasy that he had convinced himself was real. The email ended with a rather large section about me. Let's just say I didn't know he had such a low opinion of me. He was quite certain that I was not satisfying my wife properly. He criticized everything from my appearance to my demeanor, implying that I was somehow unworthy. He was trying to undermine me and make me doubt myself. Reading the email was a bit of a shock. It was obvious that he was obsessed with my wife and that had made him hate me. He saw me as something that was in the way of his wife, but instead of feeling threatened, I felt hurt. His words were meant to undermine me and sow the seeds of doubt and insecurity. Reading the email was a bit of a shock. It was clear that his obsession with my wife had twisted his perceptions and fueled his disdain for me. He saw me as an obstacle, someone unworthy of the woman he had placed on a pedestal. But instead of feeling threatened, it only solidified my resolve to protect my wife and my family from his delusions. We forwarded the email to my sister and her lawyer. It was more evidence of his unstable state of mind, another piece of the puzzle that showed just how far gone he was. This email, with its mix of apology, obsession and vitriol, might be enough to get him. It just confirmed what we already knew, that he's not right in the head. We showed the email to my sister and her lawyer, and it's another bit of the puzzle that shows just how far gone he is. The apology, obsession and anger in the email might be enough to get him out of the house for good. My wife and I are taking it one day at a time. Our friends and family have been so helpful, helping us through this weird and painful situation. My wife isn't doing great, but she's getting better every day. She does feel guilty for being too comfortable around my brother. She normally takes care to set boundaries with other men, but she felt safe around my brother-in-law because he was family and she never thought he would cross any lines. Fortunately, she and my sister are on good terms and there doesn't seem to be any resentment, which is a relief. We will all be okay, but it will take time. Thank you to everyone who commented and offered their support. My primary concern throughout this was my sister and her children. The impact of my brother-in-law. The law's impact on people's lives is huge, so making sure they're protected and emotionally supported is our top priority. Kids especially need to be shielded from toxic situations to keep them feeling safe and secure. When we're faced with these situations, it's crucial to act fast and make decisions. We didn't hesitate to gather evidence, address the issue, and seek legal help to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone involved. Delaying or denying the issue could have caused more harm. What do you think about this story? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for listening to Vibe Tales.